The grand chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with the quiet dissonance of 1,000 different life support systems. A symphony of survival conducted in the heart of the Citadel. A station spun from crystalline alloys and gravitic stability fields. Kaelen of Lythan was new to this symphony. At 52 cycles, I was considered an adolescent by my people, barely more than a child, yet I was my homeworld's chosen junior emissary. My cilia, the delicate filaments that fringed my elongated skull, trembled not with the chill of the recycled air, but with a profound and unsettling sense of inadequacy. Before me, the delegates of the assembled species argued. Their voices, a cacophony of clicks, warbles, subsonic rumbles, and modulated energy fields, were translated by the implant behind my auditory sensor into the sterile, universal galactic standard. The topic was mundane, a border dispute between the amphibious Grawl and the insectoid Cathar Imperium. Yet the verdict, delivered by High Counselor Vorlag, was anything but. The Cathar Imperium's 6th Fleet is found in violation of the Armistice of Corridon. Their punishment shall be forfeiture of the fleet and a formal censure, Vorlag's voice boomed, his craggy, stone-like features unmoving. He was a Xylos, a silicon-based being whose lifespan was measured in millennia. His words carried the weight of ages. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Forfeiture of an entire fleet for a minor territorial incursion. It was an absurdly disproportionate response. The Cathar delegate, a towering creature of chitin and fury, slammed a multi-jointed appendage on his podium. This is an outrage. The Grawl trespassed first. Our fleet was merely enforcing the established boundary. Vorlag's gaze, like the slow grinding of continents, shifted to the Cathar. Your fleet crossed into the Sol exclusionary buffer zone. The Grawl were wise enough to remain outside of it. The Grawl were merely reckless. You, delegate, were sacrilegious. The word hung in the air, heavy and strange. Sacrilegious. A term of faith, not politics. The Cathar delegate recoiled as if struck, its aggressive posture deflating. The matter was closed. Later, in the quiet observation deck overlooking the swirling nebula the Citadel orbited, I stood beside my senior emissary Lyra. Her light membranes, which covered the skin of our people, shimmered with calm authority. Mine, I knew, were a flickering mess of confused violet and troubled gray. I do not understand, I finally managed to say, the words feeling clumsy. The punishment was severe. I have studied the Council's legal precedents for a dozen cycles. It does not align. Lyra's membranes softened to a placid blue. Some laws, Kaelen, are not built on precedent. They are built on fear. Fear. The Council fears the Cathar. They are a minor power. No, she said, her gaze fixed on the stardusted void. The Council does not fear the Cathar. The Council fears what lies beyond the buffer zone. What the Cathar fleet approached. Humans, I breathed. The word itself felt like a myth. In all my studies, humanity was a footnote, a ghost. Species anomaly 734. A Class A sapient species confined to their home system, Sol, by galactic treaty. Banned from all interstellar conflict. Forbidden from militarizing beyond planetary defense. Any species that issued a credible threat against them was to be met with overwhelming, preemptive force by the Council's own sentinel fleets. Not for the humans' protection, the statutes confusingly implied, but for the protection of the aggressor. It was this part that gnawed at me. We were commanded to protect aggressors from their would-be victims. It was illogical. Why? I pressed. What could a single-system species possibly do that would warrant such reverence? Such a wide berth of empty space patrolled by our strongest ships. The archives are sealed. The files are classified beyond even your clearance. They are called the Elysium Protocols. It is as if the galaxy is holding its breath around them. Lyra turned to me, and for the first time, I saw her placid blue shift to a deep, troubled indigo. There are doors, Kaelen, that are best left unopened. The human anomaly is one of them. Your curiosity is a fine trait for a Lythani, but in this matter it is a dangerous one. Accept the law as it is. For your own peace. Her words were meant to soothe, to warn, but they acted as fuel. Peace was impossible without understanding. Why were we commanded to eliminate those who threatened humanity? What happened to the last species that broke this rule? The archives were silent, the histories redacted. It was a hole in the fabric of galactic history, a void deliberately cut and stitched shut. And I, in my youthful arrogance, decided I would find a way to peer inside. My search for answers began in the deep archives, a place of silent data streams and whispering cooling fans. The official records were a dead end, every query regarding pre-treaty humanity or the establishment of the exclusion zone met with a digital wall. Classification: VORLAG, OM&US. Not even the High Counselor's personal staff could access such files. So I turned to less official channels, the data ghosts and rumor currents that flowed through the Citadel's underbelly. I spent my evenings in dimly lit data dens, interfacing with information brokers and disgraced historians. They spoke in hypotheticals and riddles. One, a corpulent being floating in a tank of nutrient fluid, told me that the humans were psychic nightmares, capable of driving entire fleets insane with a thought. Another, a wiry avian creature whose feathers were dull with age, whispered that humanity had not been banned from war, but that war itself had been banned from approaching humanity. The distinction was subtle but chilling. The most common theory, one espoused by the more militaristic delegates like Zorgan of the Vex, was that the whole thing was a grand deception. Zorgan, a being whose species had evolved in a high-gravity, high-predation environment, saw strength as the only virtue. He believed the human anomaly was a lie, a cover for the Council's own secret superweaponry, the Sentinel Fleet, used to enforce its authority under the guise of an ancient, nonsensical treaty. It is a myth to keep ambitious species in line. Zorgan had boomed during an informal debate, his metallic voice grating. They want us to believe in ghosts in the Sol system, so we do not question the power of their Sentinel ships. The so-called Elysium protocols are a leash, and I, for one, resent the collar. His words found purchase in the minds of many younger delegates, myself included. It seemed plausible. A powerful lie was a more effective tool of control than a powerful fleet. But it did not explain the visceral, primal fear I had seen in the Cathar delegates' posture, or the deep, weary sorrow in the eyes of elders like Vorlag. Their fear was not of the Council's power. It was of something else, something older and far more terrible. The breakthrough, as it often does, came not through effort but through crisis. A garbled, panicked astropathic message rippled through the Citadel's command network. A pirate fleet, belonging to a scavenger species known as the GR Yath, had suffered a catastrophic miscalculation in their jump trajectory. Fleeing a Cathar patrol, they had not aimed for the lawless outer rim, but had instead torn a hole in spacetime directly into the heart of the Sol exclusion zone. The Citadel's reaction was instantaneous and utterly terrifying. It was not the measured response to a pirate incursion. It was panic. Alarms, silent for centuries, blared in codes I had only read about in emergency procedure manuals. The council floor, usually a place of ponderous debate, became a vortex of frantic motion. Delegates shouted at aides, their voices raw with something I had never heard in these halls. Genuine dread. High Counselor Vorlag appeared on the central holodisplay, his image towering over the chaos. His face, usually a mask of stoic patience, was a landscape of grim urgency. Seal the chamber. Command network to red alert status. I want every sentinel in Sector 9 converging on the Sol system. Their orders are not to engage the GR Yath. Their orders are to enforce the quarantine. No exceptions. No excuses. Relay the unmaking warning on all frequencies. Unmaking warning. Another myth. A broadcast said to be so terrifying it could break the morale of a fleet without firing a shot. Zorgan of the Vex was on his feet, his voice ringing with disbelief. A full sentinel deployment for a fleet of scavengers. This is madness. What are you so afraid of, Vorlag? That the pirates might scratch the paint on your phantom weapons. Vorlag's gaze fell upon Zorgan, and the chamber fell silent. The ancient Xylos did not look angry. He looked pitiful. You are a child playing with a cascade failure device, Zorgan, Vorlag said, his voice low and heavy. You think you are testing the strength of the casing, but you have no comprehension of the energies contained within. Pray the GR Yath listen. Pray they turn back, for their sake, for all our sakes. The feed cut out. We were left in the sealed chamber, the distant thrum of the Citadel's massive engines shifting as power was rerouted to the Sentinel command network. Lyra found me in the ensuing silence. Her membranes were a frantic, stormy gray. "You see now, Kaelen," she whispered, her usual composure gone. "This is not politics. This is survival." Through a discreet contact, a junior technician in the Sentinel command hub who owed me a favor, I gained access to a single, low-resolution visual feed from the lead Sentinel ship, the Vigilance. The view was filtered, grainy, but it was enough. My first glimpse of the human homeworld, Earth, was breathtaking. It was a swirl of impossible blues, whites, and greens, a jewel of life hanging in the blackness. There were no visible orbital weapons platforms, no defensive grids, no fleets massing to meet the intruders. There was only peace. A fragile, perfect, silent peace. Then the Yath fleet appeared, ugly, asymmetrical ships of scrap metal and stolen technology, tearing through the system like a disease. They were laughing. I could hear their open-channel communications translated into standard. "Look at this place. Untouched. The primitives haven't even strip-mined their own moons," the Yath captain cackled. The old stories were true. A treasure box locked and left for us to find. Then the Sentinels arrived. They were not ships, not in the conventional sense. They were geometric impossibilities, blades of pure black that seemed to absorb light, moving without any visible means of propulsion. They didn't hail the Yath. They didn't fire warning shots. They formed a perfect, silent perimeter between the pirates and the blue planet, and they began to broadcast. It wasn't a sound. It was a presence. A feeling that flooded our small viewing station through the data feed. A psychic resonance that made the fillings in my teeth ache and my cilia curl tight against my skull. The unmaking warning wasn't a message of words. It was a concept. It was the feeling of non-existence. It was the icy certainty of being erased, not just from the present, but from the past. The feeling of your entire history, your every thought and memory, being rendered null. It was the color of absolute void. The Yath captain's laughter died, replaced by a choked gasp. What is this? Get that feeling out of my head." One of the Yath ships, perhaps panicked, fired a plasma torpedo at the lead Sentinel. The torpedo traveled for a moment and then it simply vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed, it ceased to be. The Sentinel ships did not return fire. They didn't need to. Their hulls began to shimmer, not with energy shields, but with a distortion of space itself. The black material of their forms seemed to bleed into the void around them. "They are not ships," I whispered, a horrifying realization dawning on me. Lyra stared at the screen, her membranes flickering wildly. The space occupied by the Yath fleet curdled. It folded. The stars behind it did not warp, they winked out, as if a hole had been punched in the canvas of the universe. The Yath ships were not torn apart or vaporized. They were pinched off from reality. One moment they were there, a fleet of terrified pirates. The next there was only empty space, the serene blue marble of Earth and the silent black sentinels standing guard. No debris. No energy signature. No wreckage. No evidence they had ever been there at all. They were unmade. My contact in the command hub cut the feed, but the image was burned into my mind. The Council was not hiding a superweapon. The Sentinels were not weapons. They were tools. They were cosmic scalpels designed to excise a threat with surgical precision before it could ever touch the patient. And the patient was humanity. The horrifying question was no longer what the Council was protecting the galaxy from. The question was, what was humanity capable of that required a quarantine so absolute, so final, that non-existence was the preferred alternative to confrontation? The door Lyra had warned me about had been blown open, and I knew I had to step through it, no matter how dark the corridor beyond. The incident with the Yath shattered the Citadel's complacency. Zorgan's theory of a grand deception evaporated in the face of the silent, absolute power we had all witnessed. The fear was no longer a distant myth. It was a palpable presence in the halls of the Council. The debate shifted from skepticism to a frantic, desperate need for understanding. What had the Yath almost unleashed in a tense, closed-door session from which I was barred but whose minutes Lyra later shared with me? Her light membranes a constant, somber gray, Zorgan of the Vex, humbled and pale, formally petitioned High Counselor Vorlag. "We have been blind," the Vex delegate admitted, his usual bluster gone. "We have treated an existential threat as a political game. We demand the truth. We demand access to the Elysium archives." The astonishment of the entire council, Vorlag agreed. "The time for secrets has passed," the ancient Xylos rumbled, his voice heavy with resignation. "The Giaryath were a symptom of our own hubris, of letting the truth fade into legend. You will have your answers, but be warned. Knowledge is a burden, and this knowledge is the heaviest the galaxy has ever borne." He authorized the release of the Elysium archives, Tier 1. A preliminary file designed to give context without revealing the final, terrible truth. Lyra and I accessed the files together in the secure data room of the Lythani embassy. The terminal hummed, and the history the Council had fought for so long to bury began to unspool before us. It began 900 standard cycles ago, with the Great Scourge War. The archives showed us images of the Scourge, a name that still sent shudders through the elder species. They were not a civilization. They were a galactic plague, a swarming, devouring hive mind of biomechanical horrors that moved from system to system, consuming all life, converting entire planets into grotesque nests. The Scourge did not negotiate. They did not reason. They only consumed. The combined fleets of the early Council, mighty as they were failing. Species after species fell, their worlds silenced, their histories ending in a final, gurgling scream. The archive showed us the desperate last stands of the Lumina, the crystal sages of Orion, their beautiful geometric ships shattered by waves of organic scourge vessels. It showed us the fall of the Thran hegemony, a proud warrior race reduced to fleeing refugees. The galaxy was dying. And then, from a spiral arm the Council had dismissed as empty and uninteresting, a new signal was detected. It was a declaration of war, not against the Council but against the Scourge. It came from a species calling themselves humans. Their first appearance on the galactic stage was explosive. Their ships were primitive by Council standards, ugly, brutish things built of metal and fission, propelled by controlled explosions. But they were crewed by madmen. The humans fought with a ferocity and a strategic genius that baffled the Council's military analysts. They didn't fight in elegant formations. They used asteroids as weapons, lured Scourge fleets into black holes, and detonated the coronas of stars to incinerate their enemies. Where the Council fought a war of lines and honor, the humans fought a war of total, uncompromising annihilation. "There? Magnificent," I whispered, watching a recording of a human fleet, outnumbered 10-1, execute a maneuver so audacious, so suicidal, that it resulted in the destruction of an entire Scourge broodmother ship. The human commander, a female with fierce eyes and a grim set to her jaw, was quoted in the logs. "The price of victory is blood. Better theirs than ours. We pay it gladly." Humanity became the galaxy's savage, unexpected saviors. They didn't ask for territory or tribute. They only asked for one thing: data. They absorbed every scrap of information the Council had on the Scourge, analyzing their biology, their hive mind structure, their methods of propagation. They were not just soldiers, they were hunters, studying their prey with a chilling, obsessive focus. For 50 cycles, the tide of the war turned. The Scourge was, for the first time, put on the defensive. Hope, a concept that had been almost forgotten, bloomed again across the galaxy. But the archive took a dark turn. The Scourge, intelligent in its own monstrous way, recognized the source of its new problem. It adapted. It ceased its expansion across the galactic front and focused its entire, terrifying might on a single objective: the eradication of the human species. It traced their origin to the Sol system. The records that followed were difficult to watch. The Scourge threw everything it had at humanity, not just at their fleets but at their colonies, their worlds, their very existence. We watched orbital bombardments turn verdant planets into molten slag. We saw recordings from surface garrisons, human soldiers fighting to the last against waves of chittering, scythed horrors, their final screams echoing in the silence of the data room. The Scourge was not trying to win a war anymore. It was conducting an extermination. The human fleet, which had been the galaxy's shield, was forced to pull back, fighting a desperate, retreating battle back to their home system. The Council, seeing its champions on the verge of annihilation, offered aid, offering to shield the human homeworld while their fleets regrouped. The human response was curt and absolute. "Negative. The line is drawn here. Sol is not to be approached. by anyone. The final battle, known in the sealed records as the Siege of Saul, was apocalyptic. The human fleets, shattered and depleted, formed a final, defiant ring around their blue home planet. The Scourge fleet numbered in the millions. The Council watched, helpless, from beyond the system's edge, their sensors painting a grim picture of inevitable defeat. The human champion was about to be snuffed out. Lyra paused the recording. Her membranes were the color of a deep bruise. They were being erased, Kaelen. The Scourge was not leaving survivors. They were destroying their gene banks, their cultural archives, their children. They were aiming for total extinction. They were heroes, I insisted, my voice thick. They fought for all of us, we should have intervened. Forbade it, Lyra said softly, and we were about to find out why. She resumed the playback. We saw the human lines break. Their capital ships, bearing names of defiance and hope like Indomitable and Hope's Dawn, were swarmed and consumed. The Scourge pushed through, their path to the unarmed Earth now clear. The Council's astropaths registered a wave of triumphant hatred from the Scourge hive mind. They had won. And then, a single, system-wide broadcast emanated from Earth. It was in plain, unencrypted human language, but the archive provided a translation. The voice was female, calm, and utterly devoid of fear, hope, or any emotion at all. It was the voice of cold, absolute finality. This is High Command Marshal Eva Rostova, broadcasting on all frequencies. To the entity designated the Scourge, you have made a singular, catastrophic error. You have predicated your existence on the principle of consumption and survival, a flawed axiom. You have now forced a confrontation with a species that has, at last, understood that there are fates worse than death and objectives more important than survival. The voice paused, and in that heartbeat of silence, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. You came to our home to extinguish us, to make us nothing. You will not succeed, but we will. We will teach you the true meaning of the word nothing. To the Galactic Council, we offer our gratitude and our warning. What comes next is for the Scourge, but its echoes may be significant. We advise you to retreat to a safe distance. Forgive us. The broadcast concluded with 5 words that would be seared into the memory of the galaxy for all time. Thanatos Protocol is now active. Objective is no longer survival. End of line. I could ask what the Thanatos Protocol was. The sensor logs from the Council's observation fleet scrolled across the screen. There was no explosion, no energy wave, no weapon firing from Earth. There was only a change. At the heart of the Sol system, a point of wrongness appeared. The sensor logs trying to analyze it returned strings of pure error. It was not energy, it was not matter. It was a localized ontological failure. A patch of reality had just been cancelled. This point of non-existence expanded. It did not travel through space. Space itself ceased to be in its path. It moved at a speed that was not a speed. For it was not moving from one point to another, but was simply the sequential cessation of points A, B, C, and so on. It was an expanding bubble of absolute null. The first Scourge ships to be touched by it did not explode. They vanished. One moment, a biomechanical leviathan filled the screen. The next, there was only the starfield behind it, and then the starfield itself was gone as the wave of nothing continued its expansion. There was no sound, no light, no radiation. Just absence. The Scourge hive mind, which had been broadcasting a psychic scream of victory, went silent. Not a retreat, not a cry of pain. An abrupt, total cessation. Imagine a choir of 1 billion voices singing a single hateful note. And then, in the space of a thought, every singer, every note, and the very air carrying the sound simply stops existing. That was the death of the Scourge, but the wave didn't stop. It had erased the Scourge fleet in seconds, but it kept going, expanding out of the Sol system. The Council observer ships, watching from a light year away, saw the wave coming for them. Not as a visible thing, but as a creeping void eating the stars. The fleet turned and fled at maximum FTL, but the wave was faster. It was faster than light, faster than causality. It was unwriting the universe as it went. Here, the archive shifted from sensor logs to the direct testimony of the silicate chorus, a crystalline collective consciousness that had been part of the observer fleet. Their testimony was not in words, but in raw conceptual data translated by the archive's AI. It was not destruction, the chorus conveyed. Destruction implies a transformation from one state to another. This was decreation. We analyzed the edge of the field as it approached. It was not merely erasing matter. It was erasing the potential for matter to exist. It was deleting the fundamental laws of physics that allowed for existence. Space-time was not being torn, it was being repealed. We felt the history of our own location begin to fray. Memories of stars that were now inside the bubble became uncertain. Did the star Gali 7 ever exist? The answer was becoming no. The galaxy was not just being destroyed, it was being retroactively unwritten. The Thanatos Protocol was not a weapon. It was a cosmic suicide bomb designed to take not just the enemy but reality itself with it. Humanity, faced with their own extinction, had decided to retaliate against existence itself for allowing the scourge to exist. It was the ultimate act of spite, an act of such profound, insane, terrifying vengeance that it beggared belief. The archive detailed the desperate, final act of the assembled elder races. The precursors of the Xylos, the silicate chorus, and a dozen other species whose powers bordered on the godlike, combined their abilities. They didn't try to stop the wave with force. You cannot shoot a hole in nothing. Instead, they did the only thing they could. They sacrificed themselves, pouring their combined energy, their very beings, into reinforcing the laws of physics around the expanding bubble. They created what the archive called a causality sink, a metaphysical dam. They succeeded. The wave of null reality was halted, its expansion frozen approximately 1.5 light-years in radius around Sol. But the cost was immense. The elder races who performed the feat were either annihilated or diminished into echoes of their former selves. Vorlag's people, the Xylos, were once beings of pure energy. The sacrifice forced them into the slow, stone-like bodies they now inhabited. They had paid for the galaxy's continued existence with their own divinity, and the wave they had stopped did not dissipate. It remained. A permanent spherical wound in the fabric of reality. A scar. The Sol exclusion zone wasn't a political boundary. It was the shore of an ocean of non-being, with humanity living on the island at its center. I leaned back from the terminal, my body trembling, my cilia numb against my skull. Lyra was silent beside me, her light membranes a uniform, deathly white. The silence in the room was absolute. The humans hadn't been banned from war. They had been quarantined. The Sentinels were not guards, they were jailers. They patrolled the border of that wound not to keep us out, but to ensure that no one ever threatened the people living at its heart. Because the Council hadn't stopped the Thanatos Protocol. They had only paused it. The wound in reality was stable only because it was in equilibrium with the source that created it, humanity. If humanity were ever to be threatened with extinction again, if they were ever pushed back to that same brink of absolute despair, the wave would resume its expansion. They were not protecting the Gryath from humanity. They were protecting all of existence from humanity's grief. From their capacity to look upon the universe, and if it displeased them, to pull it all down into the dark with them. We finally understood. The Elysium protocols were not a leash on the galaxy. They were a prayer, a desperate, terrified plea that the sleeping god of annihilation at the heart of the Sol system would never, ever be given a reason to wake up. The revelation of the Thanatos Protocol settled over the Galactic Council not like a shroud, but like a layer of cosmic dust, chilling every surface and muffling every sound. The boisterous halls of the Citadel grew quiet. Delegates who once postured and schemed now walked with a new, heavy slowness, their eyes carrying the shared burden of a truth too vast to properly comprehend. We were not masters of the galaxy. We were tenants in a house built on the edge of a cliff, and we had just been shown the abyss. Zorgan of the Vex was a changed being. His metallic shell seemed less a suit of armor and more a cage. He no longer spoke of strength and conquest. He spoke of fragility, of the delicate balance we had so arrogantly ignored. In a full session, his voice stripped of all its former resonance, he formally proposed the Zorgan Amendment. It called for a tripling of the Sentinel fleet, a tightening of all travel corridors within 100 light-years of the exclusion zone, and most tellingly, the establishment of a new diplomatic corps whose sole purpose was to monitor the cultural and philosophical state of humanity from afar, to ensure their existential contentment. They would be, in essence. Galactic therapists tasked with keeping the patient calm. The motion passed unanimously. My own world had been turned inside out. My youthful idealism had been scoured away, replaced by a cold, hard dread that was now a permanent part of my consciousness. The universe was no longer a grand, orderly construct governed by laws and treaties. It was a fragile miracle, a fleeting exception to an overwhelming, underlying nothingness that humanity had proven it could weaponize. Lyra treated me with a new kind of gentleness, the quiet empathy one shows to a fellow survivor of a great catastrophe. We had both looked into the void, and it had left its mark upon our souls. The question that now haunted my every waking thought was no longer, what are the humans capable of? But what are they now? What becomes of a species after it has authored such a thing? Do they live in fear of their own shadow? Do they worship the dark power they unleashed? Or have they, after 900 cycles of isolation, forgotten it entirely, treating the stories of the Thanatos Protocol as we once did, as myth and legend? The last possibility was, in some ways, the most terrifying. An infant playing with the trigger of a reality-ending weapon. It was into this new, somber galaxy that the second message from Earth arrived. Like the first, it was unprecedented. It came not through the old military channels, but through the newly established diplomatic frequency created by the Zorgan Amendment. It was a simple, polite request. The people of Earth, representing the Sol Coalition, formally request permission to dispatch an ambassador to the Citadel for the purpose of opening diplomatic relations with the Galactic Council. The message sent a fresh wave of panic through the Council, but this time it was a different flavor of fear. It was not the fear of an imminent threat, but the deep, unsettling anxiety of the unknown. Why now? After nearly 1,000 cycles of perfect, absolute silence, why did they wish to speak? Had the Giaryath incursion alarmed them? Did their own internal sensors detect the Council's frantic activities, the Sentinel deployments, the deep archive probes? Did they know that we now knew their secret? Was this an overture of peace, or a warning? The debate was brief and stark. There were those who argued for refusal. Let the sleeping giant lie, pleaded a delegate from a timid, mole-like species. Do not invite the storm into our house. But it was Vorlag, his ancient voice cutting through the fear, who decided the matter. We have lived as wardens of a prison for 9 centuries. We have treated them as a plague to be contained. Perhaps it is time we started treating them as neighbors. We cannot refuse. To do so would be an act of fear, and fear could be misinterpreted as hostility. And we, of all beings, now understand the consequences of making humanity feel threatened. Grant the request. Prepare for their arrival. The days leading up to the ambassador's arrival were the most tense the Citadel had ever known. The station was scrubbed, protocols were reviewed, and a special wing of the diplomatic quarter was prepared. Its life support and atmospheric conditions meticulously matched to the specifications humanity had provided. Specifications they had apparently kept updated in a dormant data packet, as if they had always known this day would come. I was chosen, along with a handful of other junior delegates from various species, to be part of the official greeting party. Lyra argued against it, her membranes flashing with concern. You have been too close to this, Kaelen. It is not healthy. Is precisely why I must go, I countered, my voice firmer than I thought possible. I have seen the weapon. Now I must see the hand that built it. The day came. We stood in the Citadel's grandest docking bay, a cavernous space with a transparent dome showing the swirling cosmos outside. High Counselor Vorlag stood at our head, a silent, monolithic figure. The air was thick with unspoken anxiety. A ship appeared, moving out of FTL with a grace that belied its simple design. It was small, unarmed, and sleek, a vessel of pure white that shone in the station's lights. It bore no insignia, no flags of conquest. It was a ship designed for travel, not for war. It requested docking permission, its voice the same calm, synthesized female tone from the old broadcast, a chilling echo of the past. The docking ramp lowered. We all held our breath, our varied physiologies united in a single, tense anticipation. What would emerge? A warrior in power armor, a grim reminder of their martial past. A being transfigured by the energies they had unleashed, a monster of science. The figure that walked down the ramp was none of those things. It was a woman. She appeared biologically unaltered, a standard example of her species according to the old data. She was neither old nor young. Her hair was dark, shot through with threads of gray. She wore a simple, dark blue garment that was functional rather than ceremonial. She carried no weapons, no visible technology. Her face was serene. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, swept across our assembled party, missing nothing. There was no aggression in her posture, no arrogance. But there was a stillness about her, an unnerving depth, as if she were the calm eye of a hurricane. She stopped before High Counselor Vorlag. The ancient, craggy Xylos, who stood 3 times her height, inclined his head a fraction of an inch. A gesture of profound respect. "I am Dr. Aris Thorn," the woman said, her voice clear and measured, free of any artifice or translation device. She had learned galactic standard perfectly. "I am the chosen speaker for humanity. I thank you for welcoming me." Vorlag's reply was a low rumble. "On behalf of a grateful galaxy, Doctor, you are welcome. Your silence has been long." "It was a necessary silence," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "A period of introspection. We had much to consider." Later, she addressed the full council. The grand chamber was silent enough to hear the whisper of the air circulators. Every delegate from every species was present. Dr. Thorne stood alone in the center of the floor, a single, small figure in that vast space, yet she commanded it utterly. "I know what you are thinking," she began, her voice calm and empathetic. "You are thinking of the Scourge. You are thinking of the Thanatos Protocol. You have looked into our records, into our history, and you have seen the monster we carry within us. You are afraid. And you are right to be." A ripple of shock went through the chamber. This was not the speech of a diplomat, but of a confessor. For 900 years, we have been a species in quarantine, a quarantine we imposed upon ourselves. The Elysium Protocols were our request, the Sentinel Fleet our design. We knew, after the Scourge War, that we were not fit for the galactic community. A species that could choose universal annihilation over its own defeat is a disease. We knew we had to find a cure or perish forever in isolation. She paused, letting the words sink in. So we turned our science inward. We studied not the stars, but the soul. Not the atom, but the aggression that drives the hand to weaponize it. We dismantled our weapons, yes, but that was the easy part. The hard part was dismantling the part of ourselves that built them. The fear, the rage, the absolute bottomless grief that could fuel an act like the protocol. We studied our own darkness, she continued, her voice soft but resonant. We confronted it. We mapped its contours, its triggers. We learned to live with it, not as a master, but as a warden. We learned to build a society where the desperation that fueled the Thanatos Protocol could never again take root. It was the great work of 1,000 generations. And it is a work that is never truly finished. Zorgan stood, his voice hesitant. "Have you disarmed it? The protocol?" Dr. Thorne's expression turned somber. A profound sadness entered her eyes. "No," she said softly, "that is the terrible truth. We cannot, the protocol is not a machine that can be dismantled. It is a possibility woven into the fabric of our nature. It is a choice. We have simply learned at immense cost how not to make it. The potential remains. The wound in reality at the edge of our system is a constant reminder of the choice we once made." She turned her gaze, and it seemed to fall on each of us in turn, a look of profound, shared sorrow. "We have come here today not to ask for entry into your council as warriors or as leaders. We have come as penitents, as experts. We have studied the anatomy of existential dread more deeply than any species in history, for we were both its victim and its author. We have learned that true strength is not the power to destroy your enemies. It is the wisdom to not create them in the first place." Her gaze finally rested on me. I felt it like a physical touch, a direct connection. She saw the journey I had taken, the horrified knowledge I now carried. She saw my shattered idealism and the cold fear that had replaced it. "The universe is full of potential threats," she said, her voice now a near whisper, meant for me, for all of us who had despaired. "Predators and prey. Conflict is inevitable, but extinction is not. There is always another path, another choice to be made, right up until the final moment. We made the wrong choice. We chose to end everything rather than be ended. Our offer to you is this. Let us help you ensure that no one else is ever put to that same, terrible choice. Let us help you manage the threats of the galaxy, not with weapons but with understanding. We have looked into the abyss. We can show you where the edge is." She finished, and a silence deeper than any I had ever known filled the chamber. It was a silence not of fear but of awe, awe at the sheer, terrifying honesty of this small, fragile being. We had feared humanity for their power to destroy. But the real truth was infinitely more complex and frightening. Their real power was their understanding of that destruction. They had not come to threaten us. They had come to save us from ourselves, to save us from ever becoming like them. The ban on humanity participating in war was not a punishment imposed by the Council. It was a self-imposed exile. The quarantine was not our prison for them. It was their shield for us. They were not containing a monster. They were engaged in a constant, eternal struggle to ensure their own monster never again saw the light of day. As I looked at Dr. Aris Thorne, I finally understood the true nature of dread. It wasn't the fear of a powerful enemy. It was the fear of a friend who had a bomb strapped to their chest, a friend who had already lit the fuse once before and spent a millennium learning how to put it out, but who could never, ever remove the fuse itself. Humanity was rejoining the galaxy. And we, the children of the stars, could only welcome them with open arms and a silent, fervent prayer. A prayer that their hard-won peace would hold. A prayer that their inner demons would remain sleeping. Because we now knew, with absolute certainty, that if humanity ever had to fight for its survival again, the rest of the universe would not survive the victory. The silence of Saul was over, and in its place was a whisper of hope, forever shadowed by the promise of a final, all-consuming silence yet to come.